Hello everyone, and welcome to this short video which will hopefully give you some pointers that you can use as you're navigating your way through the presidential election task, but particularly for this video, the first 2 weeks of the task. Right, if you're still in the class come the end of week 2, you're going to be assigned to a political party. Now, before this takes place or after this takes place, I would suggest you try and form a mini team with 2 or 3 or even 1 other student from the class. Why is a mini team important? A mini team is important because obviously if you're working in a team, you can bounce ideas off each other. But for this general election, or this election task, if you're setting about not just trying to earn marks to yourself, but actually trying to win the thing, being in a team gives you an advantage because 2 people can cover more ground than 1 person can do. 4 people can cover more ground than 1 person does. Last year, for instance, we had an excellent student who ended up in a team on his own, and he nearly won the primary elections on his own, but didn't, because ultimately he just couldn't do everything on his own. So if you can form a mini team with, as I said, ideally 3 or 2 other students in the class, or at least 1 other student in the class, it will give you an added edge when it comes to trying to win the primary election, first of all, and then it gives you a bit more experience then in terms of working in a team when you move on to the next phase, the general election, where you'll effectively be in a larger political party with the rest of your mini team, but also roughly half the class. So you'll be fighting the general election as part of the larger Harp Party team or larger Shamrock Party team. So we'll move ahead to the end, or Wednesday in week 2, and you've formed a mini team. You've been assigned to either the Shamrocks or the Harps. Now, the next thing to do is to decide which candidate team your mini team wants to play. And it's a good idea to work fast here, because if you don't work fast, the more popular options will be gone by the time you come to pick them. So if you have time in week 1 or week 2, it's good to kind of do a bit of prior research. Read through the list of candidates. There's roughly 16 potential candidates for the Harp Party primary election and 16 potential candidates for the Shamrock Party primary election. And because I'm into gender equality, you have 8 female candidates, 8 male candidates for both those primary elections. So especially if you pick quickly or you pick early, you should have a pretty good choice of candidates. Now, don't pick the candidate who is most like yourself. That's the easy option. But it's also, it becomes harder to play them because everything becomes a bit more personal. Because if you identify too much with your candidate, any attacks on them, and believe me, there will be attacks on your candidate, it becomes more personal for you. I would actually say to try and force you to do more critical thinking, and that's what this task is about. Try to pick a candidate who is most different to you. Try to pick a candidate who is very different to you in terms of age, maybe, or political outlook, etc., etc. Other factors that you might want to take account of. Do you think this candidate is electable? Do you think this candidate, based on their character biography, has a chance of winning the election? Do you think they've got something about them that would give them a bit of an advantage in the early counties? So maybe geographically, maybe they're from one of the early counties, or maybe they're from a rural area, which might give them an added advantage in some of the more rural counties out there. So maybe Leitrim or Longford, or maybe even Laois. And last of all, would this be someone who's fun to play? Because, yeah, it's an academic task. I am trying to help you understand various ideas about electoral geography by working through this presidential elections task, but it will become a drag if you're not having fun with this. So try and have a bit of fun with the task. Well, there's things you can do with this presidential election tasks that you can't do with any other piece of academic work in university. So you can put in pictures, you can spin up yarns, etc., etc. So yeah, pick a candidate who you think you will enjoy playing, and the rest of your team will enjoy playing. Okay, once you have signed up, have got a candidate arranged. So once you decide your candidate, contact me as soon as possible. At the end of that Wednesday class on the 12th, I think it's the 12th of February. At the end of that Wednesday class, or is it the 11th, sorry, the 11th of February. At the end of the Wednesday class in week 2, I'll allow about 10 or 15 minutes to allow mini teams to form if they haven't already formed, but I'll also allow time for you to book a candidate with myself. So I'll have my list of names, and you can just book a candidate there and then. If you don't book a candidate in that Wednesday class, you can do so by email. But again, if you don't book or choose a candidate straight away, you may find that the more popular candidates are already gone by the time it comes to you picking it. Anyway, once you picked your candidate, now decide what your strategy is going to be. So the way this is set up, there's a 2-week-long primary election contest, partly just to get you into the run of the election campaign. So there's a 2-week primary election phase, and then 1 month, roughly 3-4 week general election phase, which is ultimately, because it's the longer, it's the more important one. So you can use a primary election campaign for different things. One of the things you can do in this, of course, is become more confident in terms of writing campaign posts and so on, and this is the time to make a few mistakes so that you don't make those mistakes when it comes to the last part, when it's the real serious presidential election campaign, where the Harps will be taking on the Shamrocks. So decide what your team's approach will be. Will you try to cover all the counties at the start, or will you decide to say, you know what, we've got Leitrim and Louth first. Our candidate's a rural candidate. It makes more sense that our candidate focuses on Leitrim, or vice versa. Our candidate's from an urban area. I think it makes more sense for them to focus on Louth. My advice is definitely to try and focus, first of all, on the early counties. So don't look at the schedule and say, oh, Dublin's at the end of the schedule, but Dublin is huge. There's a lot of delegates there, so we'll just spend all our time in Dublin. Because if you do so, you're missing out one of the key points about primary elections, the importance of momentum, building up momentum. So if you ignore all the early contests and you just focus on Dublin or Cork County, the problem with that is you're losing momentum by the day. In a primary election contest, momentum is built up, first of all, by doing well in opinion polls, trying to create a reputation for yourself as a front runner to win the primary elections. But once the primary elections actually begin, momentum is built up by winning primary election contests, or doing well in primary election contests, or doing better than expected in primary election contests. So you've got to think about your strategy. Obviously, there's a lot of delegates to be won in the last day of our primary elections. But funnily enough, it's these small counties at the start of the process that are probably more important, because these are the counties that allow you to build up momentum. If you come into the first few counties and you finish off in 10th place in both of them, and then 10th place in the next few counties, your campaign will very quickly start to lose momentum. And it doesn't matter how much time you spent in Dublin City. Your performance in Dublin City is going to take a whack as a result of that, because people will be looking at you and going, why should we vote for you? You're currently in 10th place in the primary election process. It makes more sense for us to vote for one of the front runners. So think about the schedule of the primary elections. Think about where you want to focus. Will you focus, if you've got a team of 4, do you think, you know what, we'll try to cover every county as much as we can, and we'll try to get something in every county? Or will you decide to say, you know what, we can't be everywhere all the time, so it makes more sense for us to focus on Louth instead of Leitrim, or Leitrim instead of Louth. It makes more sense for us to focus on Laois instead of Longford, or Longford instead of Laois. When it comes to the Wicked Wednesday primaries, then you might decide, okay, I'd say a little bit more about those in a minute. You might then also have to decide what you do. You might say, well, Dublin's got 210 delegates. So if we do well in Dublin, we're going to win a lot of delegates. On the other hand, you'll say, well, Cavan and Mayo are winner-takes-all counties. If we win both those counties, that's 77 delegates straight away. That's a lot of delegates. So there's a lot of strategizing to be done, a lot of decisions to be made. And the better you strategize, the more bang you get for your buck when it comes to putting your hard work campaigning into winning delegates. Now, the one other thing to add about this is what happens if you're that candidate who's in 7th place after maybe Louth and Leitrim, or maybe Louth, Leitrim, Laois and Longford. If you're in that position, this can be a position where you might want to sit down and say, okay, is our candidate team still a viable team? Have we a viable chance of winning this election? In a real primary election, a candidate in that phase, in that state, would generally, at that point in time, decide to suspend their campaign. Because in a real American primary election contest, the longer you stay in an election, the more and more money you're wasting, and the more and more momentum you're losing if you're not doing well. So it's a waste of time and money staying in the campaign. So generally what happens is that candidates, if they feel, okay, I've no chance now, because I've done so bad in these first 3 contests, I've really no chance of winning this election, they'll decide to suspend their election. Now, if you're in a position where, as I say, you're in 12th place or 11th place, or maybe even 4th or 5th place, after the first 4 counties or 5 counties are finished, then to me it makes a lot of sense to suspend your campaign. So suspending your campaign isn't doing the wrong thing. Suspending your campaign makes a lot of sense because it's practical. It's you saying, look, I have no chance of winning now. There's no point carrying on with our candidate's campaign, but we can endorse one of the front runners. And we can move our efforts to trying to help one of the front runners to win the primary election. So it's strategic as well. So as I said, what I want to see in this module is you trying to follow the process that you'd see in a normal American primary election and see what you'll do with that. See what decisions you make at certain points. First few days, do we focus on Leitrim or Louth? Do we focus on Longford or Laois? After the first results are in, okay, we're first place. Okay, how can we build on that momentum? Are there some of the candidates who didn't do so well that we could possibly encourage to join our team, to suspend their campaigns and join our team? If you're one of those candidates who finished in 11th or 12th place, you might be thinking, okay, you know what? It's not going to happen for us. We tried. It's not going to happen. It's not the end of the world. There's a long time to build up marks on this module, so it's not the end of the world if you've done badly in the first few days. But like the obvious thing at this stage is to suspend our campaign. But now, which candidate should we back? Which candidate should we endorse? Now, I've said this in the guidelines. If there's 4 of you in the team, that doesn't mean all 4 of you to get together and say, oh, we'll all endorse this candidate. It's okay for 2 of you to say, actually, I like this candidate. I'm going off now, and I'll endorse that candidate. And the other 2 of you to say, actually, we're going to endorse these candidates instead. So there's no rule saying that all the members of the mini team have to endorse a candidate en masse. It's up to yourselves. The main thing is you stay posting. So that would mean from that point on, instead of posting to support your old candidate, you would now be posting to support the candidate that you've now chosen to endorse. Now, the Wicked Wednesday primaries are going to be interesting. There's a lot, and this sort of reflects the real American primary election process, where it's a very slow start for the first month, where you've one primary in Iowa, one in New Hampshire, then one in Nevada, and then one in South Carolina, then slap bang, all of a sudden, 13 come at once. I've sort of kind of toned it down for this particular exercise. So I've just made it 5 counties instead of 13. So I'm not going to be that cruel and throw 13 counties at you. But obviously you'll know yourself that you can't cover every county on your own. So you'll have to make decisions. Now, this is where a clever candidate team can make good use of endorsements. So if you've sought out endorsements, then you can start to use these. So say you were a team of 4, 3 teams withdraw from the campaign and now they decide to endorse your team, and all of a sudden now you might have 15 students who are working on your campaign, and you need to use those 15 students. You need to use those 15 students for themselves because those students need to be posting to earn marks, but you need to use those students because each of those students is more or less an extra weapon in your war to win this primary election. Now, the last point I'll note is the third point, actually, the third bullet point on the slide. What should be your approach to the voters? Your approach to the voters should always be respectful. The main rule of elections is, and this is a rule that's often broken in American presidential elections, the main #1 rule is never insult the voters. You need to be able to relate to the voters, to try and find ways that you appear as being more relatable to voters, no matter whether you're campaigning in Mayo or in Kildare or in Dublin City or in Louth. What should your approach be to the other primary election candidates, including the candidate I will play? I generally say treat the candidate I'll play slightly differently to the other candidates. You will not be getting any help from me in the general election. But if your candidate wins the primary election, you're going to rely on the rest of your Harp Party team or the rest of your Shamrock Party team to offer you help and support to win the general election. So it's okay to have a few disagreements with the other primary election candidates, but don't go OTT on this. Don't fall out to such a degree that you burn your boats. In the last 2 elections I've seen, because the primary election was so vicious in such a way, the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidates, on the one hand, 2 things happened. On the one hand, they couldn't really work together because they'd fallen out so much in the campaign. On the second hand, they were so keen on defeating each other that they just burnt themselves out in the primary election. And they had no energy, nothing left to bring into the presidential election campaign, which was brilliant last year because I was working with the smaller of the candidate teams and we won. So yeah, it's okay to have disagreements with other primary election candidates, but don't go over the top on this. You guys will have to work together in another week's time. You've got to learn one of the main lessons of this module. One of the skills of this module, the transferable skills, is to learn how to basically, I don't use the word stab each other in the back, but have disagreements with each other one week, but the next week, once you picked your candidate, they're no longer this guy you disagreed with or this girl you disagreed with. They're now the best person ever. They're now the greatest thing that ever walked on the earth, and you've got to be able to pivot, learn to pivot. So don't burn your boats too much in the primary election. Save your venom for my candidate. My candidate will generally disappear at some stage, so don't worry about that. And save your venom for the opposing party in the general election campaign phase. Now, once you picked your candidate, it's always a good idea to have a picture to represent the candidate. I don't like, sorry, this is put in mildly, I bloody hate AI. But the one thing I will allow you to use AI for in this particular assignment is to generate an image of your candidate. Alternately, you can just use a picture of a real politician and use that as your own. So I'll show you how to do that. Just to stress that AI, the only thing you should ever use AI for is to generate an image of your candidate. Or maybe if you move into the general election and you want to do a nice logo for the Shamrocks or the Harps, that's okay. But basically very limited use for images. Absolutely no use of AI allowed at all for the text. If you're not great with writing if your grammar expression isn't that great, don't worry about that. I'm not going to be grading you primarily in grammar expression. Write in your own words, even though you're writing in the words that you're probably writing in the words that you would associate with a 79-year-old councillor from Monaghan, if that's who you're playing. So here's how you could pick your candidate's picture using Google. So say your candidate is a slightly angry Dublin Fianna Fáil candidate from Dublin. So I'm just typing in Fianna Fáil politicians. And mainly you can see Micheál Martin's popping up quite a bit. Strangely enough, Leo Varadkar's there. But look down at the bottom, lo and behold, who do we have there? Jim O'Callaghan. He's from Dublin, he's slightly angry, boom, that could be your picture. Okay, so we're deciding we're going to go with Jim O'Callaghan as the picture for our candidate. So then I type in Jim O'Callaghan, and you see there's loads of pictures there that you can use. Now, you're only using these pictures, of course, on Moodle. Obviously, don't get the mad idea of doing a standalone Twitter account and using Jim O'Callaghan's picture for that, because that's not legal. But yeah, it's okay to use his picture for your posts on Moodle if you want to use this picture to, say, represent Bertie Kelly, for instance, and so on. And you can just get different Jim O'Callaghan pictures through Google. So there's Jim O'Callaghan, pictures of Jim O'Callaghan campaigning, if you want a few of those. Or if you want Jim O'Callaghan, if your candidate is really upset by something, obviously not something that affects them, but something that affects the voters, because that's the sort of candidate they are. If your candidate, you want to show that your candidate is upset or angry, type in Jim O'Callaghan, angry. Okay, the next thing is what you do when you're on the campaign. There's a number of very kind of bespoke skills that you're going to pick up on this module. And one of the bespoke skills that hopefully, well, you should really, if you don't do this, you're not doing this properly. One of the bespoke skills you're going to pick up from this module is learning more about Ireland. Because you're going to be campaigning in different parts of Ireland that you may have never visited, parts of Ireland that you may have never heard of, or have little or no connections with. Am I expecting you all to get in your car and drive to these places to learn more about them? You know, if you did that, it would be pretty cool. But you know what? The internet's there. So try to do some background research on the county you're about to campaign in. Don't just wander into the county and make some generic, boring, generic statement that could be said anywhere. And you're kind of making general points. In some cases, general points have absolutely no relevance to that county. So you might be talking about, oh, blah, 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 urban roads. And you're talking to people in a rural area, and they're going, what is this city slicker on about? This has nothing to do with our lives. So try to learn a few facts and figures about the county before you go campaigning in it, that you can use in your campaign post to show that you know about that county. You can relate to that county. You can relate to voters in that county. So for instance, in this case, I'm going to show what would happen if I was campaigning in Offaly. Now, I'm from Leitch. I know a good bit about Offaly. I'm going to pretend I know nothing about Offaly. So first of all, I type in towns in Offaly. And that tells me all the towns in Offaly. So Google throws up a list of towns in Offaly, as you can see there. Tullamore, Gaishel, Kinnitty, Edenderry, Ferban, Burr, Road, Ballycumber, Clara, Sachinrone, Moneygall, Belmont, and Bracknell. So I'm going to decide, I'm going to campaign in one of these towns. So I've decided, well, Tullamore is the biggest town. I might, to show that I'm not just all about the big towns, I might go to a slightly smaller town. I'll go to Burr, which is the second or third largest town in Offaly. So if I'm going to campaign in Burr, I need to find out some facts and figures about Burr, maybe find out some places I might go to when I'm in Burr, because, you know, I'm not just about trying to win votes for myself. I want to learn more about these towns. I want to learn more about the issues surrounding these towns, what voters are interested in, because that's the type of candidate I am. I'm not just here for the votes. Spoiler alert, everyone, I am here for the votes. But that's beside the point. I want to show the voters I'm not just here for the votes. I will show them that I know already know a lot about their town, their history, its history, the issues, the type of town it is. So I'll do some background research, and you should do this anyway if you're campaigning. Okay, because I'm totally relatable, as well as knowing facts and figures about the town and being able to relate those to the voters and actually use those facts and figures to promote policy issues that might interest the voters in Birr, I want to show that I'm really, really relatable. I don't just come looking for votes in Birr. I want to show the people of Birr I like the same things they do. So if I was looking up doing this, if I had a few days in Birr, I'd definitely go to a hurling match, because Birr, my research would show me that Birr is part of the hurling area in Offaly. So I'll say I'll go to a hurling match, I'll talk with the locals, I'll have the laugh, because no one likes an owl beep beep. Everyone wants a candidate who is relatable, who you can have the crack with. And as part of that, I'm going to show the people of Birr I'm happy to go and drink and eat in the same places they go and drink and eat. So I'm going to write in my campaign post, oh yeah, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to say I visited a cafe or a restaurant while I was in Birr. I had a lovely meal there. Best meal ever, of course, because it's Birr, it's the best meal ever. I'll say the same thing when I move on to Temple Tuhi, when I go on to Tipperary, but that's beside the point. So I'll find out I'll type in Birr cafes and just find out what's the main cafes in Birr. Okay, the Loft, that's great. So I'll look up the menu. I'll even look up the menu just so that some sneaky rival candidate, and I would hope some of you would do this, doesn't come and say, actually, you said you had spaghetti bolognese in the Loft, but anyone who knows the Loft will know that, you know, the Loft that's not the sort of food the Loft does. So I'll be careful. I'll look up last year, for instance, I remember one of the students typed about a lovely meal they'd had in a cafe in Portlaoise. As I'm from near Portlaoise, I knew that cafe had closed a few weeks earlier, but I was charitable. I didn't bring that up. So try to do a bit of background research in the cafe so you can show, okay, I had a great time. I bumped into people. We talked, we listened. And I'm a politician who listens, so always say you're listening. Last thing as well you might want to do, so you can write campaign posts as I went to this town, this is what I did, this is what I talked about, this is what I promised the voters on behalf of myself as candidate, or this is what we promised the voters on behalf of our candidate. You can also use the local media. So try and do a background research on what the local radio station is in that county, what the local newspapers are. So here I can see the local radio station is Midlands 103. That's brilliant. I'm going to say, write about our candidate having an interview on Midlands 103. And I'll look up Midlands 103's website. And I'll find out what the radio shows are on Midlands 103. I'll find out who the DJs are on 103. So it sounds correct, because you know what's going to happen. Some smart Alec from the Midlands, if I make up a name of someone and say, if I say, oh, I talked to Ziggy Stardust on Midlands 103, and some culture from the Midlands like myself will say, that doesn't sound very realistic, actually. Ziggy Stardust has never been a DJ on Midlands 103. I think you're making up a story there. So do your background research, guys. Try to find out who the local journalists, DJs are on the local radio stations, in the newspapers as well. You can make your own newspaper article as well, where an article writes about your candidate's visit to that county. Now, the one thing I will say, don't go OTT in the way you're reporting this. No DJ, no journalist is going to be on the radio and saying, wow, they'll listen to your candidate and say, wow, everything you say is perfect. Try to make it sound a bit more realistic, because in the past we've had students doing these radio interviews on Midlands 103 or Tip FM, and the journalist is saying, wow, that's great, I really hope you win the election. No journalist is ever going to say that in real life. It just grinds my gears. The journalist will usually be a bit cynical. So it's okay for the journalist to sound cynical if your candidate is sounding really cool, really clever, really smart, getting their ideas across. And the same with newspaper articles. It's okay. Don't write a newspaper article as if your candidate is the best thing since sliced bread. No local newspaper's going to write that unless you control that local newspaper. And in the general election phase, I'll actually allow your parties to have specific national newspapers that you can claim is backing your candidate. So you can do a bit of that in the general election, but in these local, for the primary elections, don't come out assuming that a journalist in a local newspaper is going to write a glowing piece about your candidate. They can write a piece about what your candidate did, and then at the end of it, you can write a commentary saying, oh yeah, it was great to see that article about our campaign in the Offaly Express. We got a great reception in Tullamore, in fairness, blah, blah, blah. Our candidate, Mary, was very well received, etc., etc. That actually brings me on to one final point, how the candidates posting and the rest of the team posting. Every member of the team should post. There is teamwork involved, but all the marks you will earn for this are individual. So don't sit back in the team letting everyone else do the posting, because they're getting marks, you're getting no marks. You can only earn marks in this task by and large if you're doing campaign posts. The candidate can obviously post about what they're doing. The rest of the team can post about what their candidate is doing. The rest of the team are at an advantage because this is Ireland. No one likes a big head in Ireland. So if the candidate comes out and says, I'm the best thing ever, unless your character biography specifically says you should be doing this, there's one or two that could do this. But by and large, in Ireland, no election candidate is going to come out saying, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're usually, I just want to serve my country. Who can say that their candidate is the best thing since sliced bread? The team members can. So the candidate can be going, oh, I'm here to serve the people, I'm a humble person, blah, 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 totally relatable. The team members, on the other hand, can go, oh, we were in Burr yesterday. We saw the reception that Mary got on the streets. It doesn't surprise us because we know Mary is very engaging. She's down to earth, but she's also very smart. And we were delighted to see that the voters in Burr could see this. The reception on the ground was brilliant. The team members can blow the trumpet for the candidate to a point or a degree that the candidate themselves can't do. Okay, everyone, hopefully that gives you a few ideas. Good luck with the elections task, and I'll meet you in the campaign forum. And may the best the best student win.